Hello, everybody. Good evening, good morning. Hope you're all doing all right today. For those of you that are in the Midwest and the East Coast, I hope you're staying warm. I hope you're prepared. I hope you've got some food, some firewood, and, it's going to be a rough couple of days for you guys, it seems. To be fair, I'm experiencing the opposite. You guys get ice storms, I get temperatures over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, so it is what it is. We're back to that. Thankfully today it's only 100. It's not like 110 like it was last week. That's tomorrow. So we got a lot of news today to cover. As usual, I'm probably going to try and stick to these two main topics. I might jump around just a little bit. They're both pretty bad. Obviously, we always have American news to cover, but this one is very specifically coming out of Australia, and this is, I can't understate how bad this is. It's really bad. So let's take a look, piece by piece. So the Australian government, within 48 hours, published a 144-page bill that is now passed, and it is now law, and makes it kind of illegal to say pretty much anything, depending on the circumstances. Let's take a look.
144-page bill. And they gave the public 48 hours to submit a public comment. 48 hours for consultation for a 144-page bill. And within 7 days, including the weekend, those 7 days include the weekend, they have already passed it. So the bill has gone to Parliament and the Senate and has been passed and been made into laws that everyone now has to abide by because
So essentially they jammed the bill through. They didn't want to give the public enough time to read it. There is a lot in these 144 pages. In fact, the effects of this have already started being felt. Now, at first glance, you might think, good, it's a bill that makes hate speech illegal, right? And one of the results of this was that the NSN disbanded. You've heard me talk about the NSN at length, how much I hate the Nazi Party in Australia. However, the way that this was done is they disbanded and are now underground. None of them got arrested, and they are far more dangerous now. This is also leading to an increase in support for One Nation. It is primarily a bill that claims to be banning hate speech and hate groups, but functionally works against, well, the left more than anyone else. As you would imagine, audio levels need tweaking. I'm quiet and the video is loud. Cool, I can do that. I can put my audio up just a bit, and I can put the video down. However, as I said, this is pretty bad. It makes a lot of things very difficult to talk about. In fact, it makes some things just outright illegal to talk about, depending on whether you're part of the government or not, because how this law applies changes depending on whether you're a civilian, in the media, in the government, and we'll see.
They sat in Parliament until 11 o'clock at night to make sure that it would go through. You have not given citizens even a chance to scrutinize a 144-page
Yes, Etch, I have to talk to some lawyers now.
bill. I've read it and people have read it. It's dog shit. It is absolute dog shit that is written in there.
The bill criminalizes opinions about key matters of public policy and would allow the government to imprison its political opponents. Criminal penalties will apply even if there is no victim, and the harm is hypothetical, which would lead to Australians being imprisoned based entirely on fictitious scenarios. The bill violates basic rules of law and principle and will open the door to a police state. The bill confers on a government minister an anti-democratic power to prohibit groups, which will allow the government to disband its political opponents. Once we get through some of these videos, I have actual points on this that I'm going to read to you. I'm going to give you some examples of how this can be applied. It's not great at all.
Every single thing that it suggests shits on your democratic right to do anything. It should not have passed. It should not even have been up for discussion in the first place. And yet it's been passed. If it had gone through any kind of scrutiny, people would not have agreed to it. That's why it was passed so quickly. If it would be reasonable to pass that law now,
Look, let's listen to a lawyer explain some of the parts of this law. Before I get into it, just let's hear it from actual lawyers. This is fundamentally the same format as the United States laws that are making it more difficult for anyone on the left to advocate for change, the NSPM laws that declare everyone basically a terrorist. These are not quite that extreme, however, they share a lot of similarities. Australia looked over at the US and said, hold my beer. Yeah, in a lot of ways, this is kind of worse.
Everything. The government just rushed a new bill through Parliament. They call it hate speech law, but after reading it, I can tell you what's inside it is not what's being reported on. They've hidden a framework for control borrowed from a place that you would never expect. What if the government could dismantle groups of people overnight without the usual checks and balances? And what if simply being associated with that group could cost you your freedom? And what if it goes further? This was passed in a special 2-day sitting, which meant there was never any real debate. It is a massive expansion of the government's powers, and it happened in our name. And this is just the preview. I'm breaking this legislation down piece by piece so you know what it means for all of us. To make sure you don't miss it, subscribe and turn on notifications, because
it's pretty bad.
This is a hate speech law, and it isn't. Parliament's created a brand new category of people called prohibited hate groups. That's the key move. Because once a group is labelled that way, it doesn't just regulate what you say, it regulates what you're allowed to do, who you can support.
So the way that they're going about it, again, similarly to what the US did in NSPM 7, instead of calling you particularly an extremist, it is going after a group. It designates hate groups. And by the way, what counts as a hate group is entirely up to this unelected body to designate that, or possibly like the government beyond that. But once you are designated as part of that hate group, you basically lose all of your rights. Now, for example, they applied this to the NSN. I'm actually not even sure if the NSN got this directly applied to them or disbanded prior to it being used against them. But again, they've just now gone underground. The way this works is once you are designated as part of a hate group, every action that you do that otherwise would be legal is now going to be seen through the lens of this hate group law. Again, taking a page out of the US, it's got a little Patriot Act flavor thrown in there. Yeah, basically.
Or who you can associate with and who you can fund. It's the same framework Australia uses for terrorist organisations. This is where the power shift becomes really obvious. The law explicitly states that if these exact same...
I don't know why it's freezing so much on my end. Sorry, guys. TikTok does that for some reason.
Actions are committed by the Commonwealth Government or as part of a government agreement, then they're not offences at all. In other words, what's illegal depends on who's doing it, and it doesn't stop.
Yes, so you could have, let's say, a politician from the political party One Nation, the far-right nationalist party, the one with a lot of people who I would consider racists, you know, allegedly. And you can have one of those senators tweet something that is hateful, that is racist, and they will not get in trouble for it. However, then you can retweet that, and then you're going to get put in prison for that. Now, take that on the flip side and say somebody in a political party who is left-leaning. Let's say somebody in a political party says something negative about the United States, for example. Let's say anti-imperialist messaging in relation to Venezuela. Well, that can be called hate for nationality. That could be you're being hateful for like a religious group because, I don't know, they can just or make the argument that hating the United States is hating Christianity. They can just make shit up, and then you now have to prove your innocence, not they have to prove your guilt. This flips the entire onus of innocent until proven guilty until now you have to prove your innocence every single time. Laws for thee, but not for me.
Stop at Australia's borders. That means supporting a group that's overseas can still be caught, and being on an Australian aircraft or vessel can still be caught. Subscribe, because I'm going...
Oh, yes, that's the other thing. It can be an overseas group. So you can say, well, I mean, like, again, a lot of this is being done through the pro-Israel lobby. So, like, they don't want anyone to be able to give support to, obviously, groups like Hamas or Hezbollah or Iran. But let's say you are supporting Antifa, like the U.S. Antifa, which, again, the U.S. has designated as a terrorist organization. I really would not go around saying that publicly. You will get in trouble for that. But let's say you did, hypothetically. Well, then now you are in trouble here for talking about American politics, and you're not even saying anything hateful. You're just saying, oh, well, you know, like, I support Antifa over ICE. That is now a crime if they decide it is a crime and if they decide to prosecute it as a crime. Hard to prove a negative, harder since I do actually loathe evangelical Christianity. I mean, yeah, exactly. You have to prove that negative, and you have to prove that negative retroactively, because this law also does include things that you may have done back before things were illegal, and or said things back before they were illegal.
To be breaking down these laws until everyone understands them. Most Australians think that this is a hate speech law, and it isn't. Parliament's created.
Here's some further examples on this. The penalty applying to the offense of using a postal or similar service to menace, harass, or cause offense contrary to Section 471.12 of the Criminal Code is being up to 5 years from its current 2 years in prison time. This law impacts this. As in, you make a tweet, you can get 5 years in prison. Imagine passing an anti-hate speech law that criminalizes being against fascism. Yeah, essentially, depraved ambiance.
This new bill, it doesn't just ban radical Islam like many people were pushing for. Under this bill, reposting extremist or hate-inciting content can carry up to 5 years. So here's the twist. If you repost Senator Hansen's memes, Chocky's videos, or the Two Worlds Collide podcast, you're in the firing range too. Like, friendly fire is real. You asked for this. People wanted a royal commission.
The Prime Minister refuses to call a royal commission into Bondi Massacre because he knows it will uncover blah, blah, blah. These were things that the right-wingers were saying. This happened within 2 days. Ever since Bondi, Australia has been attacking civil rights and liberties daily. It's gotten so bad here so quickly. I mean, within a day of Bondi, I was already reporting that 8 dudes who were just going to the beach in Sydney were pulled over by counterterrorism police and, like, dragged out of their cars and arrested because they were driving to the beach while brown. The news was reporting how they had, like, guns on them. There was no guns found. None of those people were charged. There was already reports of, like, everything was lying. Immediately following, I'm sure some of you remember that viral video of all those teenagers trashing, like, a supermarket. It was a Woolworths, and the news was reporting it as, like, teenagers without access to social media trash Woolworths. No, that's not what happened. Those teenagers went to the beach on Bondi Beach, started a fight with pro-Palestinian protesters, assaulted several of them, a couple of which were Jewish individuals, and then went and trashed that Woolworths, but none of that got reported. Within, like, hours of Bondi happening, instantly, we became so much more like America. Aren't the people who were there since, like, 50,000 years ago brown? Yeah, Jade Dragon. 60, actually. The longest continuous culture in human history. You know what? I think it would be... You know what? I can't even make that joke now. I'm thinking. Because, like, okay, here's an example. Here's an example of how this law works. If I wanted to make a joke saying, I think it would be funny if Aboriginal Australians, you know, the people whose land this is, the people who were here before any of the white Australians were, before the British came, if they started to go to, like, the March for Australia rallies. If you're aware, those were giant far-right rallies that were planned by the NSN for the most part, that were anti-immigration rallies. If all of the Aboriginals in Australia just had big rallies where they said, send them home, deportations now. If I made that joke, I am now liable of hate speech for, I don't know, I guess white people? I don't know who would be the group that I am hating on in that case, but, like, that is now technically a crime. And what distinguishes whether what I just said is a crime or not is whether a member of a group that is impacted by my joke reasonably feels offended by it or not. Like, that is the law. The Bondi Beach hero was also brown. He was Muslim. His name was Ahmed Al-Ahmed, isn't it? There was two depraved ambiance. Both were Muslim. One was Ahmed Al-Ahmed. The second one, we still don't know the name of it. He was deported. He was also Muslim. He was an asylum seeker. He took down the second shooter. The police shot him, and then he was beat by the crowd, and then he got deported. So, you know. What planet are these people from? Earth? Me too? Yeah, essentially.
They wanted to ban specific groups. But the thing is, when you legislate this and put this into law, you now give the government power to censor your speech. You literally only need to go to this contents page on page 3, and it literally tells you that it prohibits hate groups, which means that these are groups of people that incite violence. So does it ban radical Islam? Yes. Does it ban radical right-wing, left-wing? Yes. Does it ban radical anyone? Hate groups, period. And let's be real. This is Senator Hanson we're talking about here. You trusted her. She ran a fish and chip shop and went to prison. And people think that she would understand complicated hate speech laws. They demanded.
I have called this woman Elmo Hitler before. It's insane that people think that, like, I don't know, they're gonna do anything good with hate speech laws. Obviously, when the right wants to institute hate speech laws, it is to block anyone on the left from talking about the horrific things that the right likes to do every day.
Be banned if it accuses Israel. Would a group be banned if it accuses Israel of genocide or apartheid, and as a result, Jewish Australians do feel intimidated?
If those criteria are satisfied, then that is the case. If there is that fear, and if there is a reasonable person test in here as well, so if that is satisfied, then that would come within the scope of these provisions.
Just as a reminder that the Australian Supreme Court has said that criticizing Israel is not anti-Semitism, so this is also just insane. So does putting a rainbow flag in your business window constitute hate speech? Well, Shade Dragon, if you put a rainbow flag in your business window and then somebody makes a complaint saying that they feel like you are discriminating against them and it is causing them fear, and they can explain it in a way that sounds somewhat reasonable, then yes, not only is it hate speech, but your business is now a hate group. So yeah, that is how that works. Don't say Charlie Kirk's face was small, that could hurt someone's feelings, which is now defined as hate speech, I guess? Kinda, yeah. Can I criticize the cadence of that speaker? It depends. It entirely depends. By the way, like, obviously a large amount of the funding and push for this is coming from two countries, really one, because I consider the motivations of the United States and the motivations of the country of Israel to be aligned, so, like, it's really just one push for this. But here is an example of some individuals in the Israel lobby inside of Australia talking about this law and what their aims for it are. Can this law be appealed to the Supreme Court? I sure hope it can. It should be appealed to the Supreme Court. Again, in a lot of the cases, this is fundamentally, like, going against Australian rights and liberties. So it's the conservative definition of hate speech. It's just speech someone hates instead of speech inciting harm against a specific person or group. Kind of, yeah. Again, it is based on whether or not an individual of the affected group reasonably feels offended or feared.
No more protests. No more protests. Now, these things are very clear. Upgrades to security. Jewish community shouldn't have to be paying for it. The 25 million they gave to us, you can't use that for armed guards. Only physical structures, they said. We have to pay for our own armed guards? Are you serious? They should be appropriating and saying for the next 5 to 10 years, all your synagogues, all your shuls, all paid for, everything.
I would like to remind everyone here that almost every attack on a synagogue in Australia has been done by right-wingers and has been increasing in severity the more the Israel lobby pushes for new legislation in Australia. Is AJAC like APAC? Kind of, yes. Again, there has already been a large amount of laws that are passed that protect the Jewish community in Australia, that prohibit anti-Semitic behavior like Nazi salutes. That has been made illegal in Western Australia. There was significant push at one point against movements like the NSN, who are openly Nazi groups, who are now disbanded under this law and have gone underground. I have already talked about how their funding comes from the same sources as the funding of sovereign citizens, the same funding of lots of right-wing political organizations, Gina Reinhart being one of the main funders, the CPAC Australia being a large funding source, the Atlas Network being a large funding source. These are American financial groups and lobby groups that are funding this kind of stuff in Australia. But beyond that, we have also had the Australian Supreme Court declare that criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitic. We've also had hundreds of thousands of people showing up for pro-Palestine protests, and now all of these people are being declared as if they are terrorists when there is zero relation between any of the pro-Palestine protesters and any of the violence that takes place against the Jewish community. In fact, in every single case, those protesters are against that violence because the pro-Palestine protesters understand the distinction between criticism of Israel and any kind of criticism of Judaism, because these are not the same thing. You can't, they're not comparable. And it's, by the way, it could be considered a crime for me to explain the distinction between Zionism and Judaism, which literal rabbis will argue are not compatible, because it's not compatible.
Everything that you need is paid for. Right. If you guys want armed police cars, if you want police cars out there, just the visuals. I just sent my daughter to a Jewish kinder yesterday, and there were no police cars out there. Think about
they want a police state because of danger that they feel, which is valid, but they're causing the danger. They are creating more anti-Semitism that then they are complaining against. I am against anti-Semitism. What they are doing is creating more of it. In fact, this entire hate group law has increased the popularity of right-wing groups that do engage in hateful rhetoric, that engage in hate speech. I mean, here, we've had we've had another coalition split on the right. And as you can see, second coalition split can benefit One Nation polling, analyst says. One Nation being the furthest right-wing party at the moment in Australia that has any chance of winning in a national election.
Last year, in the wake of the May 2025 federal election, then we saw the Nationals go sleep on the couch for a few nights and then get back together with the Liberal Party in coalition. This time, they've packed their bags, they've moved out, telling Susan Lee that the decision to quit the shadow cabinet is their final decision, and that they won't sit in a cabinet, in a shadow cabinet under her. And so this does seem like a far deeper split, and the sort of context of this split is very different to what we saw, 8 months or so ago. Again, fresh in the wake of a federal election defeat when the parties were still finding their feet. There was no shadow cabinet at that point. We were very early in this term and the coalition agreement was still being negotiated. But we're now 8 months into a term of Parliament.
Could we not repeat the 20th century? That would be great. Thanks. Yeah, unfortunately, that does not seem like it's possible. Look, let me read you some information about what this law is going to be like now. Rupert Murdoch has poisoned Australia, the US, and the UK in a devastating fashion. That is true. So, okay, first and foremost, the Minister for Home Affairs can now ban a political group without showing them any evidence for why they're being banned or giving them a free, a fair trial. So if you are a political group, they can just call you a hate group and ban you without showing you anything, justifying it in any way, or giving you any trial. A religious leader can now preach hate if they're quoting a holy book, but you would go to jail for saying the exact same thing online. Guilty until proven innocent if a journalist like me was to show a hate symbol in a news report, let's say to expose Nazis. There is a Nazi rally, they are carrying a swastika. I am showing a video clip of them doing this as part of a news report. The law presumes that I am guilty of showing hate symbols until I prove myself innocent in a courtroom of I was doing a news report to expose the Nazis. That is what happens in this law now. The definition of hate in this case includes ill will, meaning just like a nasty comment on social media could land you a criminal record. For example, a Nazi comes into the chat, starts trolling, and I answer the Nazi in the chat the way I usually answer trolls in the chat. I am now going to be legally liable for that. You can be jailed for speech just because a person that you criticize feels intimidated, which gives political opponents the power to censor us. So again, I could say something mean about a Nazi, and then they could say that they feel intimidated by me saying something mean, and then I am now gonna get jailed. How do you define ill will? Is it illegal to hope that a political party loses an election? If they feel intimidated by your comment, depraved ambiance? Technically, yes. Actual hate groups, by the way, are also now incentivized to register as political parties because the law makes it harder to ban a registered political party. So, like, not only that, like, can they ban a political group without showing them any evidence or giving them a fair trial, it is harder to be banned if you are a political party in general. It's much easier if you're not, which incentivizes them, like the actual hate groups, from registering as political parties. You better not say anything against capitalism. Well, so far I haven't seen that in this one, but that is part of the US law. The NSPM 7, being an anti-capitalist makes you a terrorist in the US. Sharing a link under this law to a protest event can now be charged as recruiting for a hate group if the minister bans the organizers the next day. So, like, there is a protest today. I share a link to said protest today. Tomorrow, that protest's organizers are declared as a hate group. I am now being charged for sharing the link today when it wasn't a hate group. So, like, is the ill will of Gen Z insult of I hope your butter on your toast never melts properly so it rips up your bread when you try and spread it? Could that be? I don't know. It's a silly example, but, like, theoretically, what bar does Australian groups have to meet to be an official political party? Well, not that high. Requirements to register as a Australian political party. I believe you just mostly need a specific amount of sign-ups, but the minimum requirements to register are at least 1,500 supporters who are on an electoral roll or members in Australian Parliament. That is registering for a political party. Main requirements. A party constitution, which is a document that sets out its aims of the political party, and at least 1,500 supporters who are on electoral rolls or a member of parliament to form a political party. I hate this fucking timeline. Yeah, I get that. No helping or standing up for poor people either. No, that makes it literally a crime. I hope you step on a Lego this morning. Hate speech, arrest them. Basically, yes. Yes. By the way, they can now cancel a visa for suspecting that you might say something in the future. I'm not kidding. The government can now cancel somebody's visa because they suspect that this person might say something divisive in the future. That is what this law says. They can do that. Pre-crime policing. You can be jailed for advocating violence just for praising a protest movement, even if no violence actually happens. Maybe you can form your own recognized party so that you have legal leverage, Vizora. I would need to find 1,500 people to support it, and then I would need, like, funds, but, like, technically, yes, that's the thing, Latino Mifune. That is the incentive. If, like, yes, that is an easier way for me to continue to be able to do this job. But think about that, because that also applies to the right. The Nazis are incentivized to form a political party so that they have more protection. I went for the silliest example off the top of my head because it's deliberately a reduction ad absurdum. I mean, yeah, we've arrived at the Minority Report portion of Australia's 21st century. Somehow this is worse than America in a lot of ways. The government can use things that your group did years ago, which were legal at the time, to declare you a hate group today. Like, 3 years ago, you went to a protest and it was legal. Today, they can declare you a hate group. Your firearms license can now be denied based off of secret ASIO intelligence files that you are never allowed to see or challenge. ASIO being the Australian CIA, basically. They can just deny your ability to have a gun without showing you why. They have files on you, intelligence files that you're not allowed to see or challenge in a court. I find you personally unattractive, and I feel you'll say something I find threatening when I comment crudely on your appearance, so I'm freezing your bank account. Literally, yeah, Shade Dragon. That is a thing that can that can be put forward now. Having digital files on your computer that simply describe how to make a firearm part is now a crime punishable by 5 years in prison now. That's them going after the 3D printed gun thing, because they've combined this hate group law with the new gun control law, which I think they did really weirdly, but let me give you some scenarios of examples of how this can be applied. Let's say, hypothetically, a university student shares a Facebook event link for a climate change protest organized by a group known for direct action. Without the student knowing, the Minister for Home Affairs designated that group as a prohibited hate group just hours before they post this link. Using their new powers to bypass procedural fairness and act without warning, by sharing the link, the student is now charged with, quote, recruiting for a hate group, defined broadly to include merely encouraging participation, and faces a mandatory prison sentence. The court rules that even though the student didn't know that the group was banned, they were reckless in not checking the government before posting this, and are now going to prison. That is a real possible scenario under this law, which has passed, by the way. It is implemented. It is current. Everything that I'm saying right now is putting me at legal risk because of just explaining how this law works. Somebody could say that they're offended by it. Let's say, for a journalist, an investigative journalist produces a documentary exposing the rise of neo-Nazis, in a cell in Melbourne, where, a lot of the NSN were. And this journalist aired unaired footage of their uniforms and flags to show the public the reality of the threat, which I have done, by the way. Instead of the neo-Nazis being arrested, the journalist is now charged with publicly displaying prohibited symbols under the new reverse onus laws, and the journalist is presumed guilty and forced to spend thousands of dollars in legal fees to prove to a judge that their work was in the public interest, causing their media network to ban all future coverage of extremist rallies to avoid legal liability, meaning none of the mainstream media will then cover these rallies because then they are held liable if they show any symbol, which means nobody gets to see them. How about, let's say, during a March for Palestinian Rights, a protester leads a chant calling for a single secular state in the Middle East. And a counter-protester records this and reports it to the police, claiming that as a reasonable member of the target group, they felt intimidated, and that the chant promoted ill will against their national origin, because the law relies on subjective feelings of the target group rather than the objective standard for violence. The protester is charged with the new criminal offense of promoting racial hatred and faces 5 years in prison for a political slogan. So, specific words that, we're already not allowed to say these slogans. Now you can get 5 years in prison for saying them. How about a religious fundamentalist preaches a sermon to thousands of people online, quoting scripture to describe specific ethnic minorities as wicked and enemies of God. And at the same time, a secular human rights activist posts a blog calling the same preacher a bigot and condemning those followers. The preacher is completely immune from prosecution due to the bill's specific exemption of religious texts, while the secular activist is charged with promoting hatred against a religious group. So, like, might want to form a religion too at the same time. I gotta join the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster or something. It's absolutely nuts. A permanent resident who fled a repressive foreign regime, let's say the United States, attends a peaceful protest in Sydney against that regime's diplomatic presence, shouting that the embassy staff are murderers and criminals. The Minister of Home Affairs can now use their expanded powers to cancel the protesters' visa on the grounds that their conduct incites discord in the Australian community and demonstrates hate-motivated conduct. The individual is detained and deported back to the very dictatorship they fled, effectively receiving a death sentence. I have think that this law was passed because the government there are pussies and got scared of the Maori spokespeople. No, that's not why. It's America and Israel forced them to do this. It is, again, this is the American and Israel lobby. Mostly the American lobby, because the Israel lobby is the American lobby. It is insane, the level of censorship that now exists because of this. Again, like, I'm unsure of how to cover anything now in Australia without being legally liable, because it is entirely subjective and based on how people feel, not by any real standard of violence. For example, Australia Day is coming up. Australia Day is generally a very contentious holiday where a lot of people consider it Invasion Day. It is the day that, you know, the British came and started to colonize and occupy Australia. These protests that happen every year are now criminalized. Don't know why everyone is worried Chuck Schumer and Apex Shakur have written another strongly worded letter. Yeah, we'll get to America too. America's bad too. I got some bad news on that for you guys. Just let's finish up with Australia and take a look at the upcoming Australia Day protests and what the plan is for them.
Police gearing up for hordes of Australia Day protesters.
We are going to show up in our thousands, as we do every year, and we want to show that we're here and we're going to continue to fight.
Anti-immigration and Invasion Day groups set to cross paths at Flinders Street.
I think people should consider what they're doing on Australia Day, because it can be at a time of heightened community concern.
This year, for the first time, there are extra measures to protect our police from the protesters. General Duties officers to be equipped with 300 helmets.
It's a really sad state of affairs that our police are being issued helmets and that they...
It's a really sad state of affair that you guys have to criminalize protest, and, like, the fact that any violence occurs at Australian protests goes back every single time. You can go look at any of the protests that happened over the last year. The violence is instigated by right-wing agitators or the police. I broke down the videos of the last major protest when it was one of the neo-Nazis, the NSM, throwing the first punch in Melbourne as they are being protected by the police. So...
need them.
Trial by Victoria Police late last year. It's a move the Police Association has long been calling for after a string of head injuries at protests.
We know that we want to keep people safe in this moment, and particularly after the Bondi massacre.
Rallies may be here to stay, but you research.
Left Kinetic, I have some good videos on it on my YouTube. I'm sorry, by the way, guys, if you do go on my YouTube, I don't make general, like, videos very often. A lot of them are my live streams, but I would check them out. I have some videos on the sovereign citizen movement in Australia, the funding for that from the United States, and it's getting bad here. We were far better off than much of the world at the beginning of 2025. We were one of the only countries that didn't vote for a right-wing party and voted for Labour. We, like, actually won the election here. The party that I advocated for won. It's just we're cucked to America. America owns us and controls everything that happens here. It's summertime down under and water drains backwards. Well, I mean, it is like 100 degrees Fahrenheit here right now, but water do not be draining backwards where I am.
It shows attitudes to Australia Day are changing. 76% of surveyed Australians now support celebrating the day on.
That is bad. That's a large growth in the right wing, by the way. Again, like, support for Australia Day has been contentious for the entire time that I've been in this country. And the fact that now 76% of Australians support Australia Day being celebrated on January 26th is not great. Personally, I have no issue with like what day it's being celebrated on. It's because the Aboriginal community is a lot of trauma. This day is called Invasion Day. You could have just moved it a day further. There are other significant days in Australian history that you could just make Australia Day and not have it be the same day. The only reason these protests happen every year is because a group of people are just so too frustrated and don't like change and don't want to change the day to another day. It would make no difference. This is also kind of like the voice vote that we had a few years ago, where it was an entirely symbolic vote that would have given the Aboriginals one singular voice in Parliament. Like it was someone's job was going to be to go talk to all of the tribes and then be the person who goes back and forth between the tribes and the government, and we couldn't even get that voted through. So
January 26, that's even higher of young Australians, 83% in favour, only 10% disagree with that date.
Well, you can see that the right wing has essentially won in Australia at that point.
One of the highest results in terms of the support for Australia Day. What this shows is that patriotism has been reawakened.
Rochelle Brown, 7 News.
That ain't great. All right, so moving off of Australia. The censorship laws are pretty bad. They're terrifying. Ultimately, this legislation asks us to trade our basic civil liberties for a false sense of security. Oh, by the way, the bill fails to protect any other marginalized group, like LGBT people, from similar hate speech. It only protects religious and ethnic groups. No protections for literally anybody else. So, like, they can be hate groups designed against LGBT people, but the law doesn't protect you from them. That's fine, apparently.